What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We're going to talk about one of the biggest debates right now in college football. Does Ohio State deserve a spot in the college football playoff? It is a very heated debate. You've got people on both sides of this. It seems like most people that are not Ohio State fans do not believe that Ohio State deserves a spot in the college football playoff. Obviously, Buckeye fans think that their team should be in, and again, it's a very interesting debate. It's hard. It's a hard debate because this year is so different. You have literally Ohio State's going to play half as many regular season games as some of the other playoff contenders. I mean, half as many games. The good news for them is they at least have one quality win there in Indiana, and if they beat Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game, that will be two top 25 wins. So that's not going to be too much different from some of the other teams that are in the playoff discussion. But again, 5 regular season games, is that enough? Do they deserve to make the college football playoff playing just 5 games? We're going to look at both sides of this argument. I'm going to try to, again, take up both sides, look at both sides of this, and then I'm going to give you my opinion on whether or not I think Ohio State should make the college football playoff. And this is assuming that they win the Big Ten championship, assuming they play Northwestern, they win that game. I don't think we're not going to get into do they win by a field goal or do they win by 30. We're just going to say they win by, what the spread will likely be for that game. So probably 14 to 20 points would be my guess. We're going to say they win by the spread. And if that happens, do they get in? Do they deserve a spot? I'll tell you whether or not I think they will or will not get in, and then again, whether I think they deserve to get in. So let's first look at the argument for why they don't deserve a spot in the playoff. And it really comes down to fewer games. They've only played 5 games. That's it. And then they'll have the Big Ten championship game, which will be a 6th game. They have a weak resume. Again, it really all ties into the top line there, fewer games. It's a weak resume. Yes, they have one win over Indiana, who is number 12 in the playoff rankings. So it's not a top 10 win, but it's a very solid win. I think that's a nice win. I know the score wound up being really close in that game, but Ohio State pretty much controlled it. It was never a game where you thought they might lose. So I look at that as a solid win, but that's it. Other than that, they really haven't beaten anyone that is even above average. So that's your only win. Their players are rested. They're going to have a lot more time to rest. They're not going to play as many games, so they'll be fresher for the college football playoff. You're not going to have as many injuries more than likely compared to teams that are playing 10 games versus 5 games. That is definitely something to look at, something that you should definitely take into account. And also, just with the fewer games, you're going to have less chances to stumble, less chances for an upset. You can look at this schedule and say, well, if Ohio State had played 10 Big Ten games, they would have won them all. We know they're the better team. Probably they would have been favored in every game, but upsets happen in college football, and these other teams that have played 10 games, they've overcome those potential upsets. Alabama versus Ole Miss. Alabama's much better than Ole Miss, but on that day, Ole Miss had their number. They were scoring almost at will, but Alabama didn't stumble. They won that game. They proved that they are a great team. Ohio State didn't have as many opportunities to do that or as many chances to potentially get upset. And because of that, there is a great argument that for Ohio State not being in the college football playoff. Is it fair to those teams that have played more games, that have had more chances to stumble, that have had to win week in and week out, not 5 weeks? I mean, it's definitely an argument here. The players rested, I don't think is as big of a deal, and I'll tell you why in just a second. And the resume, it's weak, but again, that Indiana win, that is what I think. If Indiana had not been good this year, I think Ohio State would be in big trouble. I do not think they would be in the top 4 right now. They might even be behind Cincinnati. That one win is what is keeping their playoff hopes alive. And because of that, again, they have a chance. But other than that game, the resume is really, really weak. So these are the reasons why. This is the argument for them not making the playoff. Again, I'm going to look at both sides of this and then give you my take on it and whether or not I think they should be in. So this is a very strong argument. If you're on this side of the fence, you've definitely got a good case. Let's go to the other side, though. Why they do deserve a spot in the playoff. They wanted to play. So look, it was not their fault that they had to start late and that they only played 5 games. It was not their fault. They were one of the teams that wanted to play when the Big Ten shut down their season. So it's not like it's their fault, again, for only playing 5 games. They wanted to play a regular season, just like the ACC and SEC. They were very outspoken on this. So are we going to penalize them for their conference's mistake? And you can argue this all day if you want to, but the Big Ten made a mistake. I completely 100% believe that the Big Ten made a mistake. I understand they thought that if they postponed, everyone's going to follow and it'll all be okay and they'll play in the spring. But that was not the right answer. Really, the team should have started even earlier. Even the SEC should have started earlier, giving themselves more time for these cancellations. And as far as I know, we haven't had any major issues with this virus. So that's a different topic. But again, this was the Big Ten's mistake. It was not Ohio State's mistake. They wanted to play. So are we going to penalize them for that? It was out of their control. And when we talked about the players being more rested, how about less time to find a rhythm? We have seen that in teams that have layoffs. Look at Texas A&M against LSU. Remember that game a couple of weeks ago? They didn't play for like 3 weeks. Their offense was terrible in that game. So it's a benefit to have the rest, but at the same time, it's not a benefit because you're not going to find that rhythm, especially offensively. Ohio State has not looked great at times this year, and I think that's a big part of it. They just haven't been able to get into a rhythm and play every week. So I think that kind of cancels out. So I'm not going to say that they don't deserve a spot just because they've had more rest, because again, there's the other side to that. All right, number 3 argument, they passed the eye test. I think most people would say that Ohio State looks like one of the top 4 teams right now, or at least top 6. I think Florida and A&M have an argument. But you look at the way they've played, they haven't looked great. This team, they passed the eye test. I know the first couple of games weren't as dominant as you might have expected, but they really haven't been challenged besides that Indiana game. And that, again, was a game where they controlled it from start to finish, even though the score wound up being pretty close. So, yeah, they passed the eye test. They've got the talent on the roster. We all know that. It really comes down to, do they deserve it because of what they've done on the field this season? That's really what it comes down to. And another reason why they should get in is because they're going to be a Power 5 champ. Again, this is all assuming they beat Northwestern and win the Big Ten championship game. They could lose that game. Northwestern's a good team. They could lose that game, and then they have no chance. There is a 0% chance that Ohio State will make the college football playoff if they lose a game, and that's going to be the only game that they have left. So if they lose that game, they're not getting in. If they win, they may or may not get in, and we'll look at that in a second. But this is the argument for why they deserve to get in. And my take on this, when we talk about the Power 5 champ, and I've said this before, my personal belief is that you should win your conference championship. You should have to win your conference championship if you're going to make the college football playoff. And everyone always says, well, what if the 4 best teams are in the SEC, for example? Well, you let the SEC season play out and you determine which of those 4 teams is the best, which is your champion. That team goes on to the playoff. You can't definitively say that the 4 best teams are in a conference when the conferences don't play each other enough. And this year, they're not really playing each other at all. So there's no way to know. You can say, well, these teams are the best 4. How do you know? How do you know a team? Because they look good? No, you have to settle it on the field. And so that's why I think there should be more of an even representation here, where you're looking at 4 different conferences. That's just my personal opinion. And they will be a Big Ten champion. So I think that is a big, big part of this. And you could also say, well, what if the Big Ten had not changed the rules? What if they did not play in the Big Ten championship game? I think that would have mattered. I mean, if you don't get that win over Northwestern, the best team out of the other division, how do you know that Northwestern's not the best team in the Big Ten? So I think that was important. So let's look at this now. I'm going to tell you what I think should happen and what is going to happen. And it does line up. I believe the committee is going to make the right decision here. There's no bias from me. I am not an Ohio State fan by any means. You guys know, if you've followed me, I'm an Auburn fan. I have no reason to like Ohio State, and I have no reason to dislike Ohio State. I've always done my best to keep any bias out of this channel. I say great things about Alabama. I don't like Alabama, but it is what it is. I say it like I see it. And this is my take on this. So I would love to know your thoughts before we get into my take. Make sure you comment down below, because I want to see what the overall feeling is from the college football community. What do you guys think? What's your take on this? Do they deserve to get in? Do they not deserve to get in? Again, assuming they went out and they look pretty good in their final game. So let's get into my take. First of all, if Alabama beats Florida in the SEC championship, I believe Ohio State should go to the college football playoff. Are they one of the 4 best teams? I don't know. Do they deserve it? Not really. But who does? And that's what this really comes down to. In this scenario, I don't see another team that I can definitely say it's a top 4 team and that they've had a great resume and they deserve to be in the top 4. There's just not another team. If Alabama beats Florida, Florida doesn't deserve to get in. Does Texas A&M deserve another shot at Alabama when they lost by 28 points? I don't think so. Although, if that happens, I wouldn't mind, because that was my preseason pick. So I don't think those teams deserve to get in. Clemson and Notre Dame, however that goes, you could see, possibly Clemson not making it, and then Ohio State, I think, definitely gets in if Notre Dame beats Clemson a second time. And so who is going to take that 4th spot? Assuming that Clemson does beat Notre Dame, and it's Clemson, Notre Dame, Alabama, who's going to take that 4th spot? Like I said, Florida and A&M, they don't deserve it. And then there's Cincinnati. You can make an argument for Cincinnati, but the resume is just not there. They've got some solid wins, but they don't have a win like Indiana on their resume. And they've had some close games. They've had, I think, 2 or 3 games that were 1-possession games or really close games. So Cincinnati, to me, hasn't done enough. If Cincinnati had blown out everybody on their schedule and looked really, really impressive and maybe had a couple of top 25 wins, I know they're going to have Tulsa, who may or may not be in the top 25 after they beat them. I think I would probably go with Cincinnati in this case, but I don't think Cincinnati did quite enough. I would go with Ohio State just because they've looked really good. We know the talent's there. We know the potential is there, and they have that win over Indiana. I just think putting a second SEC team in, a team that has already lost to Alabama, just doesn't make any sense. If you did that, then what was the point of the first matchup? I mean, the regular season has to matter. Those games have to matter. So again, if this happens, I think Ohio State should get in, and I think they will get in. I don't really see an argument for another team. But let's say this happens. Florida beats Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame. In that scenario, I would not put Ohio State in the college football playoff, and I don't think the committee will either. Because if you look at this, Florida would have the win over Alabama, and I'm going by the current criteria. You guys know my personal take. If this happened, Alabama would not get in because they wouldn't have won their conference championship. But given the current criteria, based on how the committee does this right now and trying to find the 4 best teams, I believe if this happens, Florida has to go in. They beat Alabama. They're SEC champions. They have 1 loss. Alabama, you could say it's one fluke game. This team has been so impressive. They clearly look like the best team. You cannot say, when you compare Alabama to Ohio State in this scenario, you cannot say Ohio State's better than Alabama. I don't think you can make that argument at all. So I think both of those teams would get in, and obviously Clemson and Notre Dame would get in if Clemson beats Notre Dame, if they split their series. Because the thing is, Ohio State has not played a team like Florida or Alabama or Clemson or Notre Dame. So we can't say that they are on this level. We don't know. If these teams can all prove that they can beat each other, we know they're on that elite level. And again, if Florida can't beat Alabama, then we can say, well, Florida's not on that level. Ohio State should get in. We know Texas A&M is not on that level, although the Aggies are playing much better now. So there are so many different layers to this. I'm just telling you what I think is going to happen and what I think should happen. If this does happen like this, Florida beats Alabama, Clemson beats Notre Dame, I think it would be very, very unfair to these teams for Ohio State to get in, having only played 5 regular season games and not playing elite competition. Again, these teams all would have played each other. Yeah, if Ohio State had played Alabama or Clemson or Notre Dame, they might have a loss, and then they wouldn't even be in this discussion. So it's definitely a fine line. It's not going to be perfect this year because this year is just not perfect. But that's my take on it. I believe Ohio State will get in, assuming the favorites went out. I believe they deserve to get in. just because there's not another team that, to me, could make an argument that they could maybe beat Alabama or Notre Dame or Clemson. But if this happens, if Florida beats Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame, I think Ohio State will be left out of the college football playoff, and I believe that would be the correct decision. So again, give me your thoughts on this. Do you think Ohio State should be in if they went out? What if this happens? Do you agree with me? If Florida beats Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame, do you agree that Ohio State should be left out? Or maybe you think Notre Dame should be left out? Again, give me your thoughts on this down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.